Welcome to Midweek Talks, where we help you follow Jesus and answer your questions in the middle of personal, social, cultural, and sometimes political and spiritual issues. I'm your host, Mark Ivy, and today we're going to talk about truth, and you may want to share this and let some individuals know what we're going to talk about today, because there is a narrative that is being espoused upon America that appears to be truth, but in fact is not truth at all. And so I want to turn your attention to a New York Times article that was written by Kevin Roose on February 2nd, just a couple of weeks ago. And I want you to listen to this, because what we're beginning to see is an attempt to manipulate the truth in the name of truth. So let me just read through some of this for a minute. And let's see if we can't, over time today, settle to where we need to be, not with subjective opinions, but with some facts. So here's how this article begins. It says, last month, Mr. Roose writes, last month, millions of Americans watched as Mr. Biden took the oath of office in a high-minded inaugural address called for a new era of American unity. But plenty of other Americans weren't paying attention to the speech. They were too busy watching, now underscore the emphasis here, the adjectives that are going to be used. They were too busy watching YouTube videos alleging that the inauguration was a pre-recorded hoax that had been filmed on a Hollywood soundstage. Or they were melting down in the QAnon group chats trying to figure out why President Donald Trump wasn't interrupting Mr. Biden's speech to declare martial law and announce the mass arrest of satanic pedophiles. Or maybe their TVs were tuned to OAN, which, by the way, is a credible news organization, where an anchor was floating the baseless theory that Biden wasn't actually elected by the people. And here's what Mr. Roose says: hoaxes, lies, and collective delusions aren't new, but the extent to which millions of Americans have embraced them may be. And then he will go on to write and say, I called a number of experts, underscore the word experts, and asked what the Biden administration could do to help fix our truth-challenged information ecosystem, or at least prevent it from getting worse. And here's what they told me. It's really important that we have a holistic understanding of what the spectrum, now watch this, of what the spectrum of violent extremism looks like in the United States, and then allocate resources accordingly, said William Braniff, a counterterrorism expert and professor at the University of Maryland. Joan Donovan, the research director of Harvard University's Shorenstein Center on Media Politics and Public Policy, suggested, now listen to this, that the Biden administration could set up a truth commission, similar to the 9/11 Commission, to investigate the planning and execution of the Capitol siege on January 6th. He said there must be accountability for these actions. Dr. Donovan said, my fear is that we will get distracted as a society and focus too much on giving voice to the fringe groups that came out in droves for Donald Trump. Appoint, they say, a reality czar or a truth czar. Now, why would anybody make a suggestion that there should be some sort of governmental position that actually defines what truth is and what lies are? The ironic thing about this is that they want to establish a commission on truth, not to expose the lies, but to hide the lies in the name of truth. And the article goes on to suggest that the experts, he writes, I spoke with warned that tech platforms alone couldn't bring back the millions. Now watch this, the millions. So the fringe groups, first they're fringe groups and now they're millions. Okay, the article itself contradicts itself. The experts I spoke with warned that tech platforms alone couldn't bring back the millions of already, notice how they're describing Americans, the millions of already radicalized Americans, nor is teaching media literacy a silver bullet to prevent dangerous ideas from taking hold. Clearly, he writes, there's a public safety issue, but there's also very much a public health issue, said Micah Clark, who's the director of Moonshot CVE, a counterterrorism firm in London. Most of the experts agreed that the most effective thing the Biden administration could do to fix our national reality crisis and possibly even de-radicalize millions of Americans, de-radicalize some of those who have been lured into extremist groups and conspiracy theory movements, would be to address the underlying problems that drove them there in the first place. We have to treat this like we would any other social service. We have to destroy, here we go, the institutional systemic racism that creates the environment. Now, the irony of this, and now I'm speaking, the irony of this is that now that the lies are coming out, they want an organization of truth to cover up the lies. They want us to believe that they are truthful when in fact there are facts that entirely disprove the narrative. Now, you understand with me, right, that when people try to dictate truth, or really here, to dictate free speech, and we're seeing a cancel culture that is shutting down an opinion if it doesn't fit with the narrative. You'll be canceled if you don't agree with the, quote, truth narrative. Now where does this occur? This occurs in communist nations. This occurs in dictatorships. This occurs in countries like Russia, China, Venezuela, who oversee what is able to be said by the general populace, and the only thing that we can believe is actually what is covered by the government or covered by media platforms. If it's any different than that, then surely it cannot be truth. It has to be a lie. So I just want to take a few moments here and say, what are some of those lies? And work through 2 or 3 different things to hopefully expose the lies, and I'll do it at the risk of being called certain names, because you understand that when somebody doesn't have an argument, all they do is call you names. So when you start to bring in truth, if they don't agree with your truth, you're radicalized, you're a racist, you're homophobic, you're practicing misogyny and a bunch of other names that are applied to people because That's the only thing that individuals have. When they don't have truth, they begin to call people by names. That's how you can often tell who is telling the truth and who isn't, by those who are calling people names. Because if you're telling the truth and they start calling you names, it may mean that you are telling the truth and not exposing a lie, and they're trying to hide the lies. So let's speak for a moment about the organization known as Black Lives Matter. Now, obviously, I know there's some ruffled feathers going up right now, and I'm already being called racist and other names. No one has an issue with the value of black lives. You say, oh, yes, they do. No. I mean, there may be a few people, but every white person is not a white supremacist. So I'm not, and I don't have issue with the whole idea of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, obviously they do. Indian lives matter. Chinese lives matter. Latino lives matter. Any race matters. And the idea that somehow that any race is less valuable than another race is ridiculous. It's not accurate. It's not the truth. Because we are here to talk about truth. But I do want to speak primarily to the narrative of the Black Lives Matter organization as it relates to truth. And I want to do it by going directly to the Black Lives Matter website, which I don't know if any of you have done that, and if you are able to right now, I would encourage you to go with me. Right now, I'm going to go to the Black Lives Matter website, and we're just going to take things that have been said. So if you go to Black Lives Matter right now, and again, let me repeat myself, the issue is not with Black Lives. My issue is with the Black Lives organization and the narrative that they are trying to portray across the nation. So if you go to the Black Lives Matter website and just click on the About link, it gives the founding of Black Lives Matter in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's death. And then it says we are expansive. And then it says we affirm the lives of black, queer, and trans folks, disabled folks, undocumented folks, folks with records, women, and all black lives along the gender spectrum. Understand with me that Black Lives Matter organization is a pro-LGBTQ organization. You can say it's about black, they can say it's about black lives. Okay, but this is not as much about black lives as it is a new political organization to expound a political agenda. Say, prove that to me, all right? Let's go to the BLM demands. Click on the link to the BLM demands. Okay, there are 7 of them. Now watch this, okay? So Black Lives Matter organization is about black lives, right? Let's go to their demands. Demand number 1, convict and ban Trump from future political office. What does that have to do with black lives? Donald Trump was a racist. The facts are that more African Americans began coming out of poverty and had a job during the Trump administration than in the last 50 years. It's just a narrative. It's not true that Donald Trump was some sort of racist. They say, convict and ban Trump from future political office. He's out of office right now. So that's not going to help black lives. Here's the second demand of the Black Lives Matter organization that's going to help black lives. Here we go. Expel Republican members of Congress who attempted to overturn the election and incited, watch this, a white supremacist attack. So everything that took place, I guess they're referring to the Capitol riot, which, by the way, there is video of the Capitol Police opening up the barricades so that individuals could actually go into the Capitol. And among those people were not just white people. There were black people, Latino people, other races. Demand number 3, launch a full investigation into the ties between white supremacy and the Capitol Police, law enforcement, and the military. Okay. Number 4, permanently ban Trump from all digital media platforms. How is that going to help black lives? Here's one. Demand number 5, defund the police. Oh, that's going to benefit black lives, especially those black lives that are living in poorer communities. We're going to take away your protection, your ability to call on law enforcement. If there's a problem, we're going to defund the police. Okay, how is that going to help black lives? Understand with me, the organization is not about black lives. It's about an agenda. Number 6, don't let the coup be used as an excuse to crack down on our movement. In response to the coup, politicians have already introduced the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act of 2021. We've seen this playbook before. These laws are used to target black and brown communities for heightened surveillance. Okay. Now there's a contradiction here. If it was all white people, white supremacists that were involved in the Capitol, this is in quotes, the Capitol riot, unquote, then why would there be new legislation that would crack down on black lives? It's a contradiction. Not going to help black lives. And then pass the Breathe Act, the Breathe Act. And listen to this. The police were born out of slave patrols. This is you want to talk about incendiary language? You want to talk about pouring gas on the fire? The police were born out of slave patrols. We cannot reform an institution built upon white supremacy. Okay, the name calling again. Not facts, but name calling, because the only thing you can do when you don't have the facts is call people names. So because I'm even talking about this now, I'm a racist and white supremacist. We need a new radical approach to the public safety and community investment. Now, I'm not going to disagree that there needs to be changes and help in terms of maybe how we're enforcing the law in America. Nobody would disagree with that. Any organization can be improved upon. President Biden has already drawn on the Breathe Act and his executive actions, the multiple executive actions that have happened, the most of any president in modern history, calling for racial equity screens in federal programs, investing in environmental justice at historic levels, and engaging with a system-impacted communities. The Breathe Act paints a vision of a world where Black Lives Matter through investments in housing, education, health, and environmental justice. In other words, again, we're not suggesting that black lives don't matter. I need you to understand. Of course, Black Lives Matter, but the Black Lives Matter organization is not about black lives. Okay, I still don't believe you, all right? So let's take a look for a minute about the Black Lives Matter, one of the Black Lives Matter founders. In 2013, this is off the Black Lives Matter website, this is under her story. In 2013, 3 radical black organizers, Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi, created a black-centered political will and movement project called Black Lives Matter. So let's talk about Alicia Garza for just a moment. Alicia Garza has founded, and I'm going to go here, and you can go there with me, to something called the Black Futures Lab. Okay, this is one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, has founded another organization called Black Futures Lab. And I invite you to go there with me right now. Black Futures Lab. It's really an organization to raise money and to incorporate volunteers and enlist volunteers for the Black Lives Matter organization. And of course, if I'm interested in being part of Black Futures and Black Lives Matter organization, I would surely want to give money to that, because if I support that, I want to support it financially, right? So we're on the blackfutureslab.org website. So just let's randomly click on the donate button, because I want to donate money to something that I believe in, okay? Now watch this. Here it is. Click on the donate button. Are you ready to join us? Black Futures Lab is a fiscally sponsored project of the Chinese Progressive Association. Black Futures Lab is a fiscally sponsored project of the Chinese Progressive Association. What is that? Well, according to the Daily Signal, the CPA, or Chinese Progressive Association, was founded in San Francisco in 1972 during the days of the Marxist-oriented Asian American movement, and that today has a very active chapter in Boston. From its start, it has been a promoter, listen, from its start, it has been a promoter of the People's Republic of China, an enemy of the United States. According to this authoritative Stanford University paper, it traces its early days to the present, which can be found on Marxist.org. And I'm quoting now, the CPA, the Chinese Progressive Association, which you will be supporting if you support Black Futures Lab and Black Lives Matter. The CPA began as a leftist pro-People's Republic of China organization promoting awareness of mainland China's revolutionary thought and workers' rights, and dedicated to self-determination, listen, community control, community control, community control, people control, and serving. It says serving the people. It's about controlling the people. So Garza, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, means to use her international platform to end world capitalism, because this is what communism is all about. In 2015, she told an important gathering of global Marxists, and I'm quoting, "It's not possible for a world to emerge where Black Lives Matter if it's under capitalism. And it's not possible to abolish capitalism." Let me say it again. Abolish capitalism. It's not possible to abolish capitalism without a struggle against national oppression. Let me say it to you again. This is not about black lives. This is not about valuing black children, black men and women, black families, black or African American marriages. This is a pro-communist, pro-Marxist, pro-LGBTQ organization that desires the overthrow of the founding of America to make America look like something that the founders never intended. Now you say, but this, but that. Listen. If you really want to know what something is all about, go to the root of it. Don't listen to the narrative. Okay, so what they're advocating now is a truth czar so that we're not able to express the truth anymore. But so all of the narrative covers over what the root system, as they refer to it, the ecosystem of America is all about. I'm just giving you truth. I'm not asking you to just randomly agree with me. I'm asking you to examine the truth. So they say they want truth. I'm giving you the truth. They say that they want the narrative to be, quote, the truth. In reality, the narrative is covering over the truth so nobody can have an opinion. And let's just assume for a minute, I'm not. But just assume for a minute that I'm 100% wrong. Why can't I still have the ability to express my opinion? They don't want an opinion because an opinion is a threat to the narrative. It's a threat to the media narrative. It's a threat to the plan. So all I'm asking you to do, so you want the truth? I'm giving you the truth. And I have to tell those of you that are African American, these people are not your friends. People that love you and care about you sincerely, that want you to prosper economically, that want you to grow and become everything that your Creator desires you to be. They're your friends. These people are not your friends. It's not about you. It's about controlling you. They're not your friends. Okay, let's look at something else. Let's talk about COVID for just a moment. All right, listen. I have been accused of being a virus denier. I'm not a virus denier. Anyone with some common sense would understand that we've had a virus that has significantly affected not just America, it has affected the world. There are many people that we know, that you know, who have gotten sick from COVID, and tragically, some of those individuals have died. They have passed away. And it would be entirely wrong of me or anybody else discussing this subject to diminish the pain felt by family members who have had someone die of COVID. So we're not virus deniers. We're not insensitive to the impact that COVID has had across the nation. But I want to deal with some truth here, because there is a narrative, and I want us to make sure that we're not leaning into a narrative that creates more fear than necessary and has us having discussions that may not be accurate. If you go to the CDC website, and it's exhaustive, and you have to search through the website, and you can go through the CDC website in the COVID Weekly Index, and you've got one of the tables there that shows the types of health conditions and contributing causes in conjunction with the deaths involving COVID in 2019. Most of the deaths, and I'm going to give you a percentage here from the CDC website. This is not my opinion. These are facts from the CDC website. 94% of the deaths from COVID were a result of comorbidities. Now, what is that? Comorbidities means that somebody gets COVID, but they also had something else going on. Maybe they were a diabetic, maybe they had COPD, maybe there was an additional sickness, maybe there was a pneumonia, maybe there were multiple comorbidities that contributed to the death of that individual. Okay, we're not diminishing that. But you're hearing all of these numbers of how many people have actually died specifically from COVID, according to the CDC website. 6% of COVID deaths were actually pure COVID deaths. Can I say that to you again? Only 6%. This is from the CDC website. Only 6% of COVID deaths were from COVID by itself without a comorbidity. You say, well, yeah, but, okay, so what's the matter with that? Well, when people get the flu, and by the way, we're not hearing a lot about the flu right now. When people get the flu, if you have a comorbidity, it's going to affect your ability to recover. If you get some other type of disease, it's going to affect your ability to recover. That's what comorbidities do, but only 6% of COVID deaths are actually pure COVID deaths. And the COVID-19 recovery rate, you're not hearing this, is somewhere between 97% and 99.75%, depending on the age of a person. That is an extremely high recovery rate. And according to NPR, National Public Radio, which is a liberal type of perception in reading of the tea leaves, in quotes, of American and worldwide news, the CDC has revised the estimate downward from its estimate in mid-April. Internal versions of the CDC scenario documents acquired by the Center for Public Integrity show that on April 14th, that would have been last year, the CDC had estimated that a 0.33% fatality rate, that was up from March 31st estimate of 0.16, and that is from the USA Today and the estimates of the COVID-19 death rate. 39% of COVID-19 deaths have occurred in nursing homes. Now, many of those could have been prevented. A new AARP report says there are several culprits, including poor government oversight and a lack of accountability in the nursing home industry. I'm only bringing this up to help us understand that the narrative across America of 500,000 COVID deaths that would assume somebody got COVID and they died. No, 94% of them had a comorbidity that contributed to the death. And as you talk about nursing homes, well, let's talk about New York, okay? Huge cover-up in New York with Mr. Cuomo and suppressing nursing home deaths for political gain. So it's whatever gain that you want to have, whether it's on the positive or the negative side, whatever you want to do, you create the narrative to either benefit yourself or to oppress other people. And of course, it's not just with COVID, it's with other things as well. But the narrative is created for a specific political, governmental, economic agenda that leads to an end result that is attempted to be developed by the single narrative. No other opinions. You got a different opinion, you're wrong, you're untruthful. I have a very, very close friend. Our family have very close friends that live in another state. He was the county coroner for the entire county. So he had to sign off on the death certificates of multiple types of incidences, and he talked to me about this and how difficult sometimes some of the things that he saw and witnessed and had to take pictures of and sign off on were. This is what he told me. He said, I was told, he's the county coroner. He said, I was told by those that were over me, if somebody dies in a car wreck, write it down as COVID. I just want you to think for a moment the implications of that across the governmental spectrum. Now, he wasn't going to do that, obviously. But if somebody dies in a wreck, just write it down as COVID, because there can potentially be a financial benefit to a local government or hospital if it is COVID related. I have a friend I've known for years, and we had a conversation recently, and they have a family member who had a relative die in a nursing home, and the nursing home told them, and these are not anecdotal stories from some website out there that I read. These are people that I personally know, that I have spoken with. The nursing home told them, if you will let us write this down as a COVID death, it wasn't a COVID death, it was just a death. If you will let us write this down as a COVID death, we will give you $1,000. You say, I don't believe that. That's not possible that that would happen. Listen, these are individuals that I have spoken to personally. These are not anecdotal stories floating around as conspiracy theories on the internet, which, by the way, a lot of those, quote, conspiracy theories have been taken down because they don't want anybody really delving into what might be taking place in certain areas of our country. And I've come to the conclusion that many of these, quote, conspiracy theories weren't conspiracy theories at all, because they're now being backed up by so much fact that they weren't conspiracy theories, they were actually truth. But, you know, if you want to develop a truth commission, you'll be able to dictate what is truth and what is not truth. Let's talk about one more thing. Let's talk about election fraud facts. Okay, seriously, you're going to go there. I'm not going to be anecdotal with you. I'm not going to give an opinion. Many people in high places were complicit on multiple levels in the last election. There is now factual information that is coming out that is highly disturbing. And these are not theories. These are facts. There are sworn affidavits from many people about illegal election activities they witnessed in the 2020 presidential election. Let me talk to you briefly about one. This is in the state of Georgia. Okay? Possible margins of error and things that demand an investigation. Let me read these facts to you, not theory. Okay, not some weird idea, not some make-believe numbers to rile people up. Categories of possible error just in Georgia. Felons with incomplete sentences registered to vote and cast their vote, 2,560. Underage children registered to vote and illegally voted, 66,247. Unregistered voters who voted, 2,423. Registered voters who registered to vote in another state after the Georgia registration date, 4,926. Voters who voted in Georgia and also voted in another state, 395. Voters voted in Georgia but changed their address before the election, 15,700. People voted who failed to register to vote in their new county in time after moving from one county to another, 40,279. Voters voted who illegally claimed a post office box as their resident, 1,043. People who died people who died who voted prior to the election. 10,315 ballots with no chain of custody. In other words, they weren't watched over properly. 600,000 voters who moved mailing addresses with no change of address when filed as moving out of a state but still registered in Georgia. 275,050 living outside of Georgia and voted in Georgia. 17,000 mail-in ballots with no return addresses, so we don't know where they came from, even if they were in Georgia. 96,000. When you add all of these up, remember that the margin of victory in Georgia for Mr. Biden was around 10,000. When you add all these possible margins of error up, it comes out to 1,567,146. Now, this isn't about pro-Trump or anti-Biden, because it goes much more than that. When these are investigated and found out to be accurate, it could potentially mean that no election in the future would be accurate, and that we could have elections, but it won't matter, because the numbers will be manipulated by whoever happens to be in power. I want you to think about the serious implications of that. These are not just random numbers. These are factual. We're only talking one state here. There were multiple states, and now there's information coming out. You say, well, the courts shut all that down. No, they actually didn't. They shut things down on procedural measures, but not on factual measures, not on the facts. And some of this stuff is now starting to go through the courts. Of course, if you have a truth commission, nobody's ever going to hear about it, because we will suppress what is going on within our culture. I don't know how many of you remember the story of one of the rulers of Rome whose name was Nero. Nero was a ruthless ruler, and Rome caught on fire. It burned a massive amount of the city of Rome. And Nero would end up going back in and building this massive palace for himself. But he began, as a political leader, he began to be criticized by the people for his mismanagement of the fire and his response to the fire. Some even believe that Nero was responsible for starting the fire so he could build this palace. So after much of the city of Rome has been destroyed by fire, and now he's being blamed either for the fire or his mismanagement of the fire during and after, he has to deflect. Now listen, he must deflect from himself in order to manipulate the truth of what really took place. So he takes a look across Rome, and you can read this in Roman history. He takes a look across Rome and says, how can I deflect from myself and create a narrative, create a lie that gives me political advantage or political gain? So what he does is he blames the Christians for the fire in Rome. He says it's this, listen to this, this radicalized, marginal group, these people who are on the fringe, this group of people that wants to rule, they want to be supreme. They are Jewish supremacists. And he blames the Christians, and this results in a huge persecution across the Roman Empire, and particularly in Rome itself, against the Christians. So much so that in order to deflect the attention from his poor leadership, he would take Christians, kill them, and then put them up on poles in the city of Rome and light their bodies on fire to light the streets of Rome at night so people could walk through the streets. Just think of how barbaric this really is. And as you read the history of this, you begin to understand, and one of the shocking things to me that I read was that in order to avoid persecution and dying, Christians in Rome, so-called Christians in Rome, they would turn in other Christians to save their lives. Think about this. So that they would not be killed themselves. As the Roman soldier is arresting them, and whether either holding a knife over them or threatening them with being eaten by an animal, because what they would do with the Christians, they would kill an animal and they would take the skin of the animal and then they would wrap the Christians in the skin of the animal and put them in these stadiums, and then they would release tigers and lions or whatever else on the Christians. They would attack the Christians because there was supposedly in the mind of the animal another animal in there, and the animal would attack this person clothed in an animal skin and obviously would kill them and eat them. And so for some of those Christians, and again that's in quotes, some of those Christians, they would turn in their fellow Christians so that they could save their own lives. Just think about the implications of that for a moment. They were giving in to the persecution narrative. My question to you is, are you giving in to a persecution narrative without even knowing it? It appears in many ways, if you're paying attention. Now, if you're just randomly looking at things and thinking, this doesn't matter to me, oh, yes, it does. Because not only is there is a rise of anti-Semitism that's moving across the world. It's anti-Jewish sentiment. But remember, the next step of that is not just anti-Jew, it's anti-Christian. Because we certainly couldn't be so selective to say that there's only one way to God, one way to heaven through Jesus Christ. There has to be multiple ways. If you don't think that that's the direction that we're headed in, then you're missing the truth. So we're actually living in a culture that has created a narrative, but it's like watching a movie. It's like we're on a sound stage, and in many ways things are manipulated. You may have seen this video, I'm going to show this to you, of Mr. Biden walking into the building. And normally presidents salute the Marines that are standing there. Just take a moment and look at this. Now, as I watched this, it appeared very clear to me that either somebody is telling him what to say, or we are being manipulated into thinking that the thought process of this man are okay. It does not appear that they are. I'm not dissing Mr. Biden here. I'm just stating the facts. So you want the truth? All I'm trying to do is just speak truth here. And there are multiple things that you can look at across this nation right now, and in many ways around the world, that if you just try to delve beneath the surface of it just a little bit, even the least inquisitive mind would have to say, what is going on here? This doesn't look right. And as you start to go beneath the surface of some of these things, you start to understand that these aren't conspiracy theories. These are facts. So, what is the solution here? You'll remember that during the Revolutionary War, and remember the Revolutionary War would lead America into its founding, into its real founding, and into becoming a nation all by itself. The first president of this country, George Washington, obviously, as you know, was involved as a general, eventually a general, in this Revolutionary War. But they were up against a force that was far greater than this ragtag group of revolutionary soldiers who were trying to gain freedom against Great Britain, that was far more powerful, had much more money, more soldiers, more resources, more everything. And as you read the history of this, you will discover what George Washington did. He began to understand that if they did not have supernatural help, literally help from heaven, read the history of it, I'm giving you the truth now, help from heaven, that it wasn't going to be possible for them to be able to win this war. So they developed a flag in the same color as the uniforms of the soldiers. It was called the Appeal to Heaven flag. They would fly it on their little navy. They would carry it with them. And it simply meant they were appealing to heaven. They were appealing to God for help because they knew they didn't have any other help. Now listen, I agree you should get involved. Some of you that have a secure relationship with God and aren't going to give in to all the narratives, you should run for office. You should know what's going on. You should be involved in the process. Remember, there's a difference between government and politics. Government is the institution that God established to help oversee and organize a culture. Politics is what man has done to God's government. And you should get involved. But I need you to understand that we are now at a place around the world, and particularly in America, because we are really the last stand of potential truth. Other nations around the world, China, Iran, Venezuela, Russia, Saudi Arabia, other nations are controlling the narrative and certainly aren't free nations as it relates to sharing, preaching, teaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. We have one appeal. And our appeal at this point is not simply to congressmen who may have agendas of their own. Some of them are very good. Some of them are genuine, honest people. But as has been evidenced over the last number of months, decisions are made for political purposes and political gain and power, not for the benefit of people that have elected them. So we really only have one appeal. And that appeal is to heaven. That appeal is to the living God. That appeal is to come before God and say, God, help us. It's going to take God getting involved in this and exposing the lies for where the truth needs to be seen. And even though there are people that want to suppress the truth, there is a God that can expose the lies and reveal the truth. I'm asking you to make an appeal to heaven. To stop being just angry and shaking our fists at people on social media that we think should think differently and act differently and do differently. Most of our words are falling flat. They're not making any difference. It's just us sharing an opinion so we can get a like from a friend. I'm asking you to appeal to heaven. I'm literally asking us to humble ourselves before the living God and saying, God, first of all, in my own life, you're my only hope and strength. In my family, you're my only hope and strength. And in this nation, do what George Washington did. In the middle of a revolutionary war, we are in another revolution. And make an appeal to heaven for divine intervention and for truth to be as truth must be. Ultimately, we know that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, not somebody's opinion of Jesus, but the real Jesus. We have one appeal, that's to heaven. Let's not get caught in the narrative of being told what we have to believe, but let's search deeply for the truth and what we must do and what must be done. I'm Mark Ivy. Thank you for joining us this week on Midweek Talks, and we will see you next time.